I have a superpower. It is the greatest gift my parents have ever given me, which is why now that I'm on the red circle, I want to take this opportunity to give you that gift as well. When I was 16 years old, as was just shared, I stared down a wild lion in the heart of Africa. Many years later, when I was applying for my dream job, despite all my hard work, I faced unemployment endlessly. And a couple years ago, you probably remember this, the pandemic, well, not just my career, but my entire industry was devastated. What do those three stories have in common? The choice to adapt or to die. In a quickly changing world, I believe the ultimate superpower for every human here in the room and watching is your ability to adapt. Because when change is required, some resist, some hold on for dear life. But I believe the difference between merely surviving and truly thriving is your ability to adapt. The son of an Indian diplomat, I grew up in many countries. I had to move every 2 to 3 years. I had to adapt to new countries, new cultures, new contexts. I've taken decades of that personal experience and combined it now with a data-driven scientific approach as I pursue a PhD on the topic of adaptability. I know you really want the 400-page thesis, but for the moment, you'll have to settle with the 12-minute TEDx talk. So, on that note, I want to share 2 tips, 2 stories, not the lion story. That will save maybe for when you're looking up other TEDx talks. But let's talk about the dream job. The dream job. For you to understand the setback in my life, I need to share with you the setup. See, I'm a good Asian nerd. I worked hard. I got an Ivy League degree from Yale University. I got 3 presidential awards. On my way, I got several accolades in community service and sports and music. I worked really, really hard. And I just had my master's degree from Trinity College in Dublin. Everyone told me, Dan, the world is your oyster. You can do whatever you want. But what they didn't tell me is the world was in a recession. Oblivious to that, with full optimism and hope, I applied for my dream job to be a consultant. I was so ready for this job, but I heard no. Not a problem. I applied for more, and I heard no. So I applied for consulting jobs in other industries. I heard no. I applied for consulting jobs that required less qualifications. You guessed it. No. I applied for jobs with a lower pay grade. No. I applied for jobs that if they gave me the job, I would say no. They didn't even give me that chance. They said no. The situation was dire. Days turned into weeks, weeks turned into months, and nothing was changing. It was at rock bottom that I uncovered the first key to adapting. If you can't change the situation, change the story. I was so tired of hearing no that I decided the story from now on would be yes. Whatever the next opportunity, I would say yes. So I was sitting there one day, and a dear friend of mine calls me and says, hey, Dan, can you volunteer as an investor to a bunch of 12-year-old girls who've been working on a business idea for 24 hours? My ego told me I had the qualifications to teach a college-level class. My wallet reminded me that I didn't have enough money to be an investor, let alone a fake investor. So I humbly said yes. And then I Googled, what is an investor? What does an investor do? What clothes do they wear? I worked hard at it, and I was the best fake investor those little girls had ever seen. And that evening, I got a curious phone call from one of the dads saying, hey, Dan, never heard of you, but because of you, my little girl believes that she can be an entrepreneur. You must be a motivator. Could you come to my company, a media business, and motivate my staff? Note the irony. He wanted an unemployed guy to come in and motivate the employed people. I needed the motivation. Anyway, I said yes. I learned, I adapted. I was not qualified to be an amateur motivator, but I gave it my best. And a couple weeks later, I got a message from the print side of the media business saying, Dan, you're so optimistic, so motivational. You're very accomplished. I didn't tell them that in the last year, my only accomplishments was a fake investor to 12-year-old girls and an amateur motivator. That aside, they said, could you write an article on the 5 future tech trends of Ireland? My qualification for that? None. But I adapted, and thanks to Google, I wrote something beautiful. And nothing prepared me for the call that came next. Because then a real investor from the real Dragon's Den of Ireland called me and he said, Dan, I read your article. We need that kind of wild optimism and bold ambition. And he said that he had been selected to be the chairperson of a 7-person advisory board. He wanted me to be one of 7 advisors to the Minister of Jobs, Enterprise, Innovation, putting recommendations that became the national policy on entrepreneurship signed by the Prime Minister. For 18 months, I had pursued this one direction of my dream job as a consultant, and I wasn't able to change the situation. But the day I changed the story, focusing on the yes and not the no, focusing on the door that was open and not the door that was closed, focusing on what I could do and not what I couldn't do, that day is when everything changed. And as I started adapting to the opportunities, well, instead of consulting a company, I ended up consulting a nation, affecting millions of jobs and billions in GDP. So let's come to the second story. The pandemic. You remember this? It was quite recent. We were all affected by the pandemic. In the last couple of years, I've had the great joy of being an event MC and moderator. The 3 conditions for why you require an MC. Large crowds of people, crammed into indoor spaces like this beautiful hall or stadiums or convention centers. And because I do about 100 events in 4 continents, a lot of travel. What were the 3 things banned almost instantly with the pandemic? Large crowds, indoor spaces, and flying. So everything that I had built, the brand, the reputation, the opportunities, the relationships, everything came to a screeching halt in a matter of days. I was distraught. I felt like everything I had done was destroyed. Because for me, it was more than a job. It was a calling. It was a purpose. And so, in that desperate situation, I called my parents and I said, hey, Mom, hey, Dad, you know how you love me? Can I move back in, please? And so I bought a one-way ticket back home to our humble family home right on the side of an elephant sanctuary in South India, far from what was familiar and outside of any known opportunity. I faced a bleak future. And for weeks, like many of us, I wished that life would go back to normal. But in doing so, I missed the second nugget on adaptability. The second key to adapt is actually a motto that I've been sharing in every opportunity I have, which is start now, start simple. And so as we're sitting in our team talking about how we had the same mission to love people, but not the same method, we discussed what we could do. And we came up with a simple plan. I would go that very night on Instagram Live and share my heart and motivation to the peoples. And a grand total of 6 people watched. But I didn't give up. The next day, I went again and again and again. And by the end of the week, I started calling it The Daily Show with Dan Ram. And by the end of the month, just one step in front of the other, building momentum, we ended up having billionaire founders, Grammy-winning musicians, and record-breaking athletes on my humble podcast, live stream, whatever you want to call it, from my bedroom in South India. Along the way, I adapted. I upgraded my webcam, my lights, my sound. I was even one of those people that repainted their back wall in their room, so I had an iconic red in the background of all my Zoom and Teams calls. And I also learned some new skills on editing and publishing, which is why, by the second month, when the pandemic situation was reaching a critical stage, when the team said, Dan, let's take it to the next level. Let's create a virtual benefit concert for nurses and first responders. And so we did. With what we had learned, adapting again, we got almost 100 artists to perform for thousands of viewers all across the world. And little did I know that some of the decision makers of Fortune 500 companies and from the 3 tech giants of the world were watching little old me in an elephant sanctuary live streaming this concert. And they reached out and said, Dan, we need to figure out this whole virtual thing. Can you come and help us put on our first global virtual conference. And so we adapted that music studio from which we did our first ever virtual music concert. Well, we used those singing mics and turned them into speaking mics. We used the cameras that were used for making music videos, turn them into live streaming. We used the dashboard and the production that we used for music, use them for events. My graphic designers, who were used to making props and designs for the stage, now we're creating immersive virtual reality platforms. It was amazing. And from that elephant sanctuary in South India, I started live streaming all across the world, creating concerts and events for Fortune 500 companies, for universities and parliaments. And I think this comes as no surprise that that world eclipsed the world that I knew, simply because I dared to adapt. So here's the bottom line. Change is constant. It will happen. But if you activate your superpower to adapt, you will realize that uncertainty is actually just unlimited possibility. That trials are an opportunity for transformation. And behind every obstacle is an opportunity to take it to the next level. So, beautiful people in this room and online, activate your superpower and adapt. Thank you.
Dan Ram. Very interesting topic, very interesting story. But Dan, since you have that same kind of microphone I have, what about the lion story? How do you actually survive being charged by a lion? Yeah, give him some...
Check. Do any of you know what to do when you face a lion? Any guesses? Say hi would be wrong unless you can speak lion. Yes? Make yourself bigger works with hyenas and certain animals, but certainly with not with lions. Lay down and die works with bears. Lions are smarter.
Yep,
Lions
bears
will sniff you and go, easy meal. So the answer to the story is, so the lion was roughly where you were. I was about here. And it's actually counterintuitive, but it's also a lesson for life, which is whatever you're facing, even if it's a lion, you take one step towards it. Because for a predator that is so used to chasing prey, where they turn around and run, when you face what scares you, well, the lion gets confused. And so the lion backs down, you wait your moment, you take another step. Sometimes you don't know if the step will land, sometimes you don't know what the answer will be, but one step at a time.
Very cool. And if you want to learn more, interact with the speakers. And that's what the ideal was. Thank you, Dan.